project proposed in a small town has stirred up some controversy.
Grace Bradley went to Columbia Falls to see how folks are reacting to the plan for the world's tallest flagpole.
Columbia Falls is the closest town to the proposed site of Flagpole of Freedom Park. Included in the $1 billion project is a flagpole taller than the Empire State Building, which would wave an American flag larger than a football field. The plan also includes a village of history museums to tell and honor veterans' stories, including an auditorium, restaurants, monuments, and gondolas. The Worcester family, best known for their wreath business, is behind the proposal. Folks in town are torn between the pros and cons of such a monumental project. While some have questioned the area's ability to cater to such large crowds of tourists and employees, others welcome the change.
Honestly, it would bring more money to Down East. It would definitely bring a lot of more jobs.
Clint Nelson owns the Blueberry Patch Motel and Cabins in Jonesboro. He says he's preparing for the influx.
I'm adding on to my motel because of it.
Not only do some think the attraction and theme park will bring in business, but it will also send a message of the importance of patriotism.
I think we need patriotism back in this country again. It's faded away over the last 40 years or so.
However, not everyone is sold. Some are still skeptical as the project gets fleshed out.
It would be okay with the plans for the flagpole, except for the actual flagpole itself. Seems like it's going to be seen from miles and miles away, and I don't know if I necessarily like the idea of being able to be 40 miles away and still be able to see the flagpole from my house.
We talked to some that oppose the project who declined to be on camera. Concerns they raised include the environmental impact, change of Columbia Falls small town culture, and the mistrust of the Worcester family. Because the 10,000-acre plot is in a neighboring township overseen by a state agency, the legislature approved a bill that would let residents vote to annex the land. But things are currently on hold. In March, residents approved a 6-month moratorium on large developments, giving the town time to develop the needed rules and regulations. If approved, the first phase of the project is scheduled to open July 4th, 2026. Grace Bradley, WABI TV5 News, Columbia Falls.
Well, Mike Worcester, one of Moral Worcester's sons, recently told the Associated Press the family respects the wishes of town residents who want more time to stay.